I want to make a comment right now about my appreciation for being here and kind of a kindred spirit I feel with the horrendous pressure that the long time and well-established John Birch Society has weathered, I think, quite well. I recall some years when you folks were taking some terribly unfair and abundant heat. And the national organization that I chaired from 2001 to 2007 is called Citizens Equal Rights Alliance. We're a small organization. We're the only organization in the United States that focuses on federal Indian policy. And we organized in the mid-'80s to assist tribal members who, as Betty mentioned, have very difficult tribal governments and are not always kind with their members. And tribal members, enrolled tribal members, do not have the Bill of Rights or the civil rights. And if a tribal member gets sideways with their government, they can't go into a state court or a federal court and say, my government has harmed me, or someone within the tribal leadership has harmed me. They have no recourse. And so some of us, before I joined Citizens Equal Rights Alliance, we call it SARA, before I joined, some of the founders were reaching out. We're living on and near Indian reservations, and we're seeing these things, and we're doing what they could to help, and that's how we organized. Then in 1988, when the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act was passed, suddenly it's like steroids, and life changed dramatically on the reservations across the country and among many, many little communities that were absolutely clueless about federal Indian policy, and were wondering what hit them when they had a big Class 3 tax-exempt gaming casino plunking down in the middle of their little town. Take all the disposable income from the town, the shops and stores, and put them into the slot machines. So suddenly our organization was getting calls from one community after another, and we have grown exponentially from that. But backing up a little bit, Betty mentioned that I am of Indian ancestry. My mother and grandmother were enrolled. I am not enrolled. My husband is a direct descendant of Sacagawea. There's a chapter in the Going to Pieces book dedicated to my husband because the correct pronunciation, I always say this for him, is Sacagawea. It is not Sacagawea. She was kidnapped as a child, as a little girl, by the Mandan Hidatsa Arikawa tribe of North Dakota, and she's now a statue in the Capitol building in Congress on behalf of the state of North Dakota, the very tribe that kidnapped that little girl from her Idaho Shoshone-Lemhi tribe, and says she's one of us, that kidnapped her as a child, and imagine the lifestyle, and then sold her to a little drunk Frenchman. They now claim her as one of North Dakota's finest. And it was funded, get this, it was funded by all the women groups in North Dakota gathering pennies from the schools to get a statue for Sacagawea. Yeah. It was really a statue to the first battered woman. You know what I mean? Yeah. She was, and my husband, when he saw this on TV, he just about had a heart attack, and he's a very mild-mannered man. But anyway, the reason I mention these things is because we make, and it's really important that all of us make very clear distinctions between government decisions and respect for all cultures, beginning with, well, all cultures, American Indian, all cultures. Government decisions are not culture, culture is not government. And so that is the way, when we learn about this secret thing called federal Indian policy, when we learn about it, and when we discover it is affecting our front porch, our property, non-tribal people, we have to speak up. We have to know what this is, and we have to speak up. And we have to separate respect for culture from government decision making. And that was a painful process that I learned on the Yakima Reservation when I lived there for 16 years, because I had worked very hard to have a great relationship with the Yakima tribal leaders. I was the town's community development director, and I had a very good rapport with the tribal leaders. And then when I resigned and hung out my own shingle as a sole source community planner, the Yakima tribe was my first client, and a big client, a long-time client. I had wonderful friends and family, friends with the Yakimas. And then along night, then their casino came to town. A big Class 3 casino plunked just outside of the city of Toppenish. And I don't know if any of you have been over to Toppenish, but they have these beautiful historic murals and little Conestoga wagon and horse-drawn tour. And that little horse would clop, clop past my office every 45 minutes during the tourist season. When the casino doors opened, the wagon came by every 45 minutes, where it came by started coming by maybe twice a day, maybe twice a week, then once a week, and then by appointment only, because all of the tourism and disposable income that was supporting the town's shops and restaurants went out to the all-you-can-eat buffet and the slot machines. And one shop after another started closing up in Toppenish. And then the tribal government would open up tribal service programs in those empty spaces downtown. So the town could not generate new revenue to support the town. So Toppenish has wonderful folks that live there, and they're still doing all they can to keep the town going, but they have taken an incremental blow. Not only that, Toppenish is 10,000 people, and it is in 2 square miles. Very small lots, homes, whatnot. 75% Hispanic, 10% Anglo, 10% American Indian. 10,000 people at 2 square miles in Toppenish. The tribal government has acquired all of the property around the boundary. There's no way that city of Toppenish can grow. It's all in federal trust all the way around it now. So those are kind of some of the things when decades and decades of folks of many cultures living together, having warm friendships, going to school together, playing ball together, all of a sudden something gets very different and upside down. And the folks that have grown up there don't know what hit them, don't know what to do. And all of a sudden those friendships fall apart and hurt. So the reason I'm sharing this is because some of this is incrementally creeping up on you, and now, today, 2014, Montana has a big 3-prong assault. And it is coming from a larger voice than the Salish Kootenai tribe. If there's one message you get tonight, this is an us versus them. But you need to know the us is not necessarily the Salish Kootenai tribe. The us is us citizens, Montana citizen. The them is not necessarily Salish Kootenai tribe. The them is your state of Montana. That's the first big them. The bigger them is the federal government.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to be talking about this evening. But I want to get back to why I now have dedicated the rest of my life to what I'm doing. I had good friends in the tribal community, and I did a lot of good work for them. And then we read the Toppenish Review one morning, the Yakima Herald, and learned that they were going to ban alcohol from the reservation. It's a big 4 million acre reservation, and they were going to ban alcohol. That would have shut down 47 beautiful wineries, because that's an ag valley, they grow grapes. 47 beautiful wineries would have been closed. Then the next day, and it's almost the same newspaper, within the next week, they were going to take over the Grant County Public Utility District and 2 dams, the Wanapum and Priest, just in the northeastern side of the reservation. And that would have dramatically affected the agricultural industry throughout the Yakima Valley, what they had plans for with the dams. And the third thing they were going to do is negotiate something with the power company to take over our electricity. And I thought, wait a minute, I want to help you every way I can, and that's what I've been doing, because I came up out of Southern California very naive, and I have a lifetime affection for American Indian, for all of our American history, but especially American Indian history. I couldn't wait to be there, couldn't wait to do whatever I could, and all of a sudden, this is a neighbor that is coming after my community. And I'm a non-tribal person, or our community is, and I had to make a very painful and personal decision, you know. I spoke up and I said, I'm willing to help any way I can, but do not govern me. I may not participate in your meeting, do not govern me. I'm in their government. do not govern me and do not govern my friends. Well, the moment I did that in a letter to the editor, it was the last time the tribe called me for any work. I lost a very big client. But it was even more painful than that. I was willing, I knew I was going to lose the client when I went public, but I didn't know I was going to lose my friends. And in Toppenish, there's a little three-corner triangular park in the post office. And you know how small communities have their little community habits? Everybody goes to the post office to get their mail. Then they go to the drugstore, and in Toppenish they have coffee and roll dice. And we all, you know, so every morning I would go over to get my mail, and I'm always running into tribal friends and whatnot, and they would walk across the street and not wait. If I said hello, they would not speak and walk across the street and go a different way. And I was being shunned. And I thought, what? You know, these are government... That was a very hurtful experience. And I'm going to say that I don't think my friends were doing that because they wanted to. I think they were somehow told not to be seen with me. For whatever reasons. It was very, very painful. Well, long story short, we formed a little citizen group. You have wonderful groups up and down these 11 counties. We were absolutely clueless on Indian policy. I got on the internet and searching around, where do we start? And found a group in New York that started emailing me and talking to me on the phone and telling me, well, you need to read this, you need to do that. And they brought me into Citizens Equal Rights Alliance, and then soon after that I became the national chair of that organization. So that's a little background on me. Tonight I want to talk about the three things that are coming at you and where they're coming from. One is the lawsuit that was filed February 27th. And I don't think it's any coincidence that all three are coming at you simultaneously. The lawsuit that was filed February 27th, the planned transfer of ownership of the Kerr Dam to take place by September 2015, and this goofy proposed compact. I'm almost having fun with it because it's really just amazingly what I would call felony stupid, you know? It really is. It is just felony stupid. And I'll attack it in a minute. But my point is, yeah, I've been all over the country in the recent years, in Massachusetts, in Oklahoma, in North Dakota, in Wyoming, in California, and out here in Washington. And the conversations that I'm hearing and having with folks in these rooms, first, the folks in these rooms have the two things it takes. And I put it in my book when I sign them. I say, stay forever curious and courageous. Anybody coming into these rooms to listen to me chat is already curious. And I think quite courageous in terms of you're up at the top of the food chain of courage from your community. But the conversations that I'm hearing are strikingly similar to the readings I've done on the American Revolutionary War. We're talking about all this federal overreaching, where the EPA is reaching out and bypassing the states and going out onto private property, and Department of Education and passing the state education departments and going out and breaking through the door of a local school superintendent. The federal government is into such a serious, dramatic overreach right now. It is frightening to me. Absolutely frightening to me. And that is not disconnected with other things internationally, in my view. I'll go into that a little bit later. But this federal movement, there seems to be a movement to reduce and diminish and neuter the authorities of states, particularly states in the western states, but states. The federal government is absolutely diminishing state authority. There's only one way they can do that. That's if your state lets them. This state has just caved in large part. Now, I have to say I've met some really fine state legislators who get it, who see what's happening, who have opposed these things, and who have been attending these events. And I'm really thrilled that there are more than I suspected out here. Unfortunately, they're not the majority, but at least they're there, and they're working hard to help you. So the lawsuit that was filed February 27th was kind of the ringing of the bell. The lawsuit claimed 100% of the water since time immemorial, over these 11 counties, based upon the Hellgate Treaty of 1855. Well, isn't that special? Can you imagine? can you imagine the next door neighbor, a couple of ranches side by side, and one bought one from the other, and now life is really good, and then the one that sold the land walks over and says, John, I sold you that land a long time ago, but I need more water. I'm taking your water. It's been mine since time immemorial. How neighborly is that? I mean, how fundamentally neighborly is that? I think it's depraved, because it's based on a lie. It is based on a lie. Think about it, just common sense. Time immemorial in the United States. In my view, time immemorial in the United States began when Congress ratified the United States Constitution. That's the beginning of time for this government. So when you hear folks, blathering around all these wonderful terms like Aboriginal rights, indigenous, time immemorial, pre-constitutional, we were here first. You know what I tell them when they say we were here first? I say, you're so lucky we were here second. You got to been another country, we'd be studying you like the dinosaurs. You know what I mean? So I don't buy the we were here first. Every human being on the North American continent, including American Indians, are immigrants. There's a reason they sure wanted to bury Kennewick, man. So we were all immigrants to this country. But my point is, the Constitution of the United States is our governing document. So when you hear these fluffy words, Aboriginal, indigenous, time immemorial, we were here first, what you're hearing is the international narrative. It's really the international narrative of trying to coalesce all the international Aboriginal tribes, trying to get all under the umbrella of the United Nations, and trying to, get back at that United States that stole their lands. Well, good luck. It's infuriating to me. And I guess at a personal level, it's infuriating to me because I was born in Portland, Oregon, 1943. I'm 71. I was born in Portland, Oregon, when my dad was assigned there temporary duty to be given his orders to Europe in the war. My mother was valedictorian of her class, had never been out of Oklahoma or away from her family, and she's pregnant with me. Her husband's about to be taken to Europe in the war, and I'm born passing through Portland. And so there's a long, I won't go into the particulars on that, but later on, after the war, my father was a traveling insurance salesman. I mean, a real live traveling insurance salesman. I attended 7 schools in the 2nd grade. On Pocatello. 7 schools. I've always envied those families that stay on the land, and their kids stay on the land, and the families stay together, and those stable populations. But I was always moving. Yakima, Seattle, Pocatello, Spokane. And then he moved, for God's sakes, to California. I cried all the way to California in 1957, hated the first palm tree, hated the sand, wouldn't go to the beach, and I still feel that way. I do. And my son, who was raised down there, won't get off the beach. He was one of those little blonde California surfers. And now he's a boat builder on Ventura Harbor, and I'll never get him off the beach. So, until the earthquake causes him to move, we're going to have infrequent visits. But in any event, I never had a hometown. So I came back from that trip and I said, kids, drop my ashes over Plymouth Rock when nobody's looking. I have a home country. And I think that, and my experiences on the Yakima Reservation, and my current experiences on the former Oneida Reservation, where I live in Green Bay, I'm a public employee for the village of Hobart, and it's co-located on. I think those life experiences have brought me to a point in my life where I'm through raising my kids and grandkids. I even have a little 2-month-old great-grandson now. That combination of experiences and this road trip, our national group funded, what I call the Thelma and Louise trip, of me and a videographer that went across 17 reservations, and that's now the Going to Pieces book. The living through that experience, just listening to the people across the country, and then coming back to Toppenish and sitting down January, February, March, and reliving it for the book. And the other experiences I've just shared with you, it's like, this is what I do with the rest of my life. This is what I do, is federal Indian policy, sharing information with communities, encouraging everybody to just, there's simple principles that nobody has to be a genius on this, nobody. But learning to have the courage to stand up and speak up. There's a really bright line about Indian policy. They have absolute authority over their tribal members and tribal properties. They have no authority over a non-tribal member or non-tribal property unless there is consent. And that's why you're all in trouble, because the state of Montana is consenting. That's part of that compact. They are consenting to transfer off not only the water of 11 counties off and on reservation, the in-stream flows and all that, but they are also transferring off through those 11 counties your constitutional rights, 35 enumerated rights, one of which is the right to sue, which we're helping people get ready to do the day after they pass that if we can't beat it first. They're transferring off their state jurisdiction over 360,000 Montana citizens and shunting you off to a tribal government that first has absolutely no duty to you, and second, you may not participate in. I've just never heard of something so outrageous, but that's all part of that compact. So Clarice, I met Clarice 8 years ago, and one of your wonderful woman, former legislator Aubin Curtis, I got to see her again just the other day. I met Clarice and Aubin in Joseph, Oregon, up in Wallowa County, where a bunch of us were helping them form a community group about 8 years ago. And I think it was a year and a half, or real early this year, maybe similar to the filing of the suit, that Clarice called me. She says, you know, Elaine, I bought your book when we were in Joseph, Oregon. I read it, but she says, I picked it up and reread it, and it really hit home. Everything you're writing about is happening now. So this book was written, the road trip was 10 years ago this month. It's not a new book. It was written 10 years ago this month. But I had no clue at the time we were capturing the information and hearing the concerns of the folks across the country, and by that I mean tribal members, teachers, bankers, farmers, sheriffs, folks that live on and near 17 reservations. I had no clue that as we're capturing the things they're worried about, the things they're experiencing, that in 2014 it has fired up across the country. An example is Montana is ground zero on 100% of the water since time immemorial. Skagit County, Washington, tribe over there, 100% of the water since time immemorial. Southwestern Oregon, the Klamath tribe, same thing. Northern California, the Yurok tribe, same thing. And last week, the Osage County in Oklahoma folks called me. Same thing coming there. The federal government is doing something really, really troubling. And I have a nice piece of news, because my congressman, Reed Ribble in Wisconsin, is my congressman. He's not a flashy guy, but he's an absolute statesman, and he follows this stuff and he understands it. He has a very high regard for your congressman, Steve Daines. And I've been, I'm constantly working with Congressman Ribble's office. I have very close rapport. I had no close rapport when I was in Washington State with the Indian princesses, Senator Maria Cantwell and Senator Patty Murray. I was there when we had the 3 Indian princesses, Governor Gregoire, who gave 29 tribes 5 casinos each. There's only 5 big towns, areas in Washington. But Congressman Reed Ribble is one of the few logical, reasonable, sane, 4 corners of the Constitution members of Congress. And when I say few, there are others like him, but they're hard-pressed right now. What I want to mention about that is that the federal government is overreaching. When the Twin Towers fell on September 11th, and President Bush was at that little school in Florida, and then up in the plane, he had, and nor did the whole country have any idea what happened, what was coming, how bad was it going to get, how far was it going to be. They just didn't know. We had never experienced anything that devastating since Pearl Harbor. And so they fashioned, the federal government quickly fashioned the Homeland Security Act. And it had its little tweaks and flaws here and there, but basically it put a system in place where federal funding could get down through the states, anyone that was hit. They set a pretty good system in place to track terrorism, to set, to keep us safe. That was the Homeland Security Act. There was a clause in the Homeland Security Act that says, because they did not know how far and how wide, there was a clause that said, in the event of necessity, the executive branch may militarize the otherwise benign agencies. Mm-hmm. Now we have the Army, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, but in the event of an emergency, and in those years when we were doing the Homeland Security Act, we weren't certain how big we were at risk. They put that clause in, could militarize otherwise benign agencies. Otherwise benign agencies are about 29 of them, beginning with the EPA, the BLM, the Fish and Wildlife, the Department of Agriculture, USDA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, all of them.
Food and drug.
Pardon?
Food and drug.
Food and drugs, yes, all of them.
USDA?
Yep, USDA, all of them. President Bush never implemented that clause. Your current president has. And I find it really ironic because there's all this madness and buzz about that crummy Ferguson Police Department. They've got too much equipment. Take a wild guess at what EPA has, or the BLM has, or of course you saw some of it on television with the Bundy Ranch. You know what I mean? The conversations I'm hearing in rooms today are a lot like the folks in the Revolutionary War that are worrying about the taxation without representation, removing the guns of the colonists, parking the soldiers in homes without the British soldiers in homes. All of those conversations that were causing a few, not all, but enough colonists say we can't take this anymore. This is unfair. This is not right. Just before I was hearing conversations right now in 2014 that are so similar to just before Paul Revere got up on his horse. Only it isn't the British coming as it was then. It's our federal government coming.
Amen.
Absolutely coming at us. And one of the kickers is, so many of our states receive a lot of federal funds. And that's like a federal handcuff. States need the money and they're accepting the funds, and the states have to kind of dance to the funding puppet. So that's the first wedge, The other wedge is that the federal government has 566, we're talking about one, but there are 566 federally recognized tribes. And there's some 340 pretty good sized reservations, and ironically many of them are out in the middle of nowhere, or they're very near high target risks of terror attacks. They're very near dams, they're very near power companies, they're very near facilities that are fundamental to our energy grid. Absolutely fundamental to our energy grid. Kerr Dam. My Congressman Ribble is sponsoring a bill that your Congressman Steve Daines is a co-sponsor of, and there's 21 sponsors so far, and that list is growing. But it's called the RAD Act, and I encourage all of you to speak to congressmen everywhere, support passage of the RAD Act. I don't remember the bill number, but RAD is Regulatory Agency Demilitarization Act. This is something that is not going well. You know how the current the executive branch is treating Congress. And Congress, a few of them, or enough of them, are beginning to grow a spine. Just like a few of them, enough of them, the colonists, we're going to say no more. So that RAD Act is, I'm so proud of my congressman in Wisconsin and yours here in Montana And we need to get that passed and get a lot of citizen support behind it. Everybody needs to get behind that act, because that will at least put some of the brakes. That will force the federal government to go through its state agencies instead of bypassing them, come right onto your property, like they've done frequently, like EPA has done in Wyoming. We've got to get the federal government and the relationship between the federal government and the states back to some semblance of fairness, because it's the state that protects us. So if the state is already beholden to the federal money, that's we're on the left foot. And if the federal government is, through the BIA, is rolling out programs for Indian tribes across the West to capture water, to capture lands, to money up the tribes with this and with that, EPA uses treatment as safe, which is entirely unconstitutional. So they're going to treat them as a state for air quality, give them control over your air. There are so many of these things that the federal tools that are rolling out, it's very hard to keep up with. So that's kind of the background that we're dealing with. I guess the reason I mention that is because it isn't the Salish Kootenai tribe that is the problem. It really isn't. I even met with about a dozen or so tribal men and women down in Ronan who are so severely ignored and mistreated by their government that they were willing to meet with me, and they just poured their heart out. And they are worried. They do not want their tribe to have the dam. They are embarrassed by the lawsuit. But they're as clueless and uninformed, and they have no part in the decision-making process, and they're troubled by these things. They don't want this kind of reputation for their tribe. They all grew up together, neighbors like you, and so this is not a tribal, this has nothing to do with the tribal members. This is a few tribal leaders and the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. at the BIA making these little decisions and not telling anybody until maybe you have 30 days to comment, or it's already a done deal. So that's the background. The adversary here, and it's a shame, is your state and our federal government. And that's where the focus has to come. I want to get to things that we can do, but I also want to highlight what I think is the biggest problem you have right now. And it is not Kerr Dam, because I think people like Congressman Ribble, Congressman Daines, Homeland Security, they are not going to set a precedent to allow the first private domestic government with a chip on its shoulder to manage a dam. You know what I mean? How frightening is that? So I have sent everything your Senator Verdell Jackson has written to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Every time I'm getting useful information, I ship it to my Congressman Reed Ribble. He's shared it around with others. And there are folks outside of Montana paying attention to this. The lawsuit is so frivolous because it's based on the Hellgate Treaty, which is a wonderful piece of paper, but it's moot now, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And it's based on time immemorial. Love that. So I'm not that, you have very good legal representation, and their briefs responding to that lawsuit are excellent. Now I do say, whoever wins or loses, and I think the Montana citizens will prevail at the lower court. I'm sure the tribe will appeal it up to the Ninth Circus, and they, they're just quite liberal, and they're the most overturned appellate court in the country. In fact, they were almost divided up. They just have a horrible reputation for appellate courts. So it will be appealed up there, and if they give it back to the tribes, then it will go up to the Supreme Court. So that lawsuit's going to wend its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I don't care who's sitting on the bench then. They're not going to buy this time immemorial garbage, you know. So I think the lawsuit is not the big concern. I don't think the dam is a big concern, because I think federal and national security issues are going to prevail. But the thing that we really need to focus on is that proposed compact. And I want to run through a few what I call very serious flaws. Oh, first let me tell you that I've studied all the constitutions. There's three. It violates, one of the flaws, it violates three constitutions. The federal constitution, your Montana constitution, which is a beautiful document. It's only 30 pages, simple, clear, protects the people with 35 enumerated rights, protects the resources and the waters, the natural resources of the state with an excellent Article 9 on the environmental life support system. And what is water if not the environmental life support system? But did you know that the Salish Kootenai tribe also has a tribal constitution? And that tribal constitution was brought about by a vote of the adult members of the Salish, Kootenai, and Pend Oreille tribes, who were offered when the Indian Reorganization Act was passed in 1934. That was an act that was to end the allotment system. John Collier, who was the commissioner of the Bureau of Indian Affairs then, was an avowed communist, and he had been enamored with the communal living of the Pueblos in the southwestern area, and so he pens this Indian Reorganization Act, which allows tribal governments to reconstitute, because if an Indian received an allotee, he became a citizen of his state. He had to walk away from his government, and he was a citizen of the state as an Indian allotee. So the Indian Reorganization Act of '34 reconstitutes them, allows them to vote to have a tribal constitution, be a tribal government again, and the Hellgate Treaty, the only thing that came forward from the Hellgate Treaty was the boundary of the Flathead Reservation. That's Article 1 of the tribe's new constitution. The governing authority of the Salish Kootenai tribe did not really begin in 1855. Their governing authority began when they were federally recognized. You know, they serve, all these tribes are federally recognized, and they went through a period where they de-recognized. They are federally recognized, serving at the pleasure of Congress. Salish Kootenai governing authority date begins October 28th, 1935. Just like we have a date when our U.S. Constitution was ratified and we had a government, they have a government now of October 28th, 1935. So a lot of the legalese that you're hearing is going way back to 1855, way back to time immemorial, but their governing authority was October 28th, 1935, and here's why. If you're familiar with the Hellgate Treaty or the Isaac Stevens treaties, they were meant to be peacekeeping treaties. They were absolutely intended to be peacekeeping treaties. The Bureau of Indian Affairs had two missions along about 1855, actually much earlier. They had a dual mission, and those treaties were executed by the federal government on behalf of two people. They were executed on behalf of the Indians to provide them a land, provide them resources, provide them money, blacksmiths, wagon builders, annual money, and provide them protection through a federal sovereignty that no one could intrude upon their right to live as they chose, and never be intruded upon by a non-tribal person or community or state. That they had their reservation, but if you read that Hellgate Treaty, there's no governing system in there. It's land, money, resources, and it's a place where three tribes, Salish, Kootenai, and Pend Oreille, can live as they wish, do as they wish, but not a governing authority over anything but to live as they wish. That was it. The other pieces in this Isaac Stevens treaties were for that second party. That's the settlers. We were settling the West. And so in those treaties, there's always open public roadways for railroads to come through, roads to come through. The tribe will never intrude upon the ability for non-tribal people to pass through. Then there's that piece that says, that paragraph in every Isaac Stevens, every Indian treaty, that says, you will cause no harm. You will not fight with other Indians. You will cause no harm to anyone. Those were peacekeeping treaties because from at least 1855 until 1934, that Indian Reorganization Act, the Bureau of Indian Affairs had two missions. It was protecting the settlers and setting up the Indians in a safe space. That's really all it was. So one of the ornery things our little community group did in Tompanish was the Yakima treaties, treaty days all week long, June 9th every year. Treaty days, big deal, you know. So our little community group decided, hey, we're doing settlers days, you know. This is our treaty too. And so just to be ornery, we had a fun little picnic in the park one late evening, and We had a guy dress up like Paul Revere on a horse, and he just clapped around the park in front of the post office, and we recited the, listen my children and you shall hear. And I mean, it really irritated the heck out of some of the folks. But we had a wonderful time because those peacekeeping treaties were for both of us. They were for the Indians, they were for us. So all that changed. It became one mission of the Bureau of Indian Affairs when John Collier got that Indian Reorganization Act. It's like, all right, we're done. West is settled, 1934. Now it's only about the Indians. And we're going to bring them back together and give them a government, all these things. But every tribe that was under federal jurisdiction then was required to vote. This tribe, it's amazing, this tribe voted, 2/3 of the 3 tribes, their adult members, voted to come in under the Indian Reorganization Act. Now we have, my village that I work for has awesome research that we've worked hard to receive. I happen to have a handwritten memorandum from John Collier that I have, and it is his memorandum attaching a list of the first Indian Reorganization Act tribes. Top of the list, Flathead Reservation. First on his list, Flathead Reservation, October 28, 1935. I handed that document to the editors of the Daily Interlake today. They're going to find that in a packet. So that is their governing date. They're going to be fun. Nothing like that appears in their compact. Their constitution isn't even referenced in the compact. They're just referencing the old treaty, which is a lovely piece of paper that you can revere and put on a wall, kind of like our old Articles of Confederation, So that is a flaw. This proposed compact violates the U.S. Constitution, your Montana Constitution, and the tribal government's Constitution. All throughout, on every page of that tribal government, it says, over your tribal people, your tribal members, your property. Nothing else. So it violates all 3 constitutions. The other thing is, the very same thing that our whole federal government has gone through is a strategy they must have thought was successful, so let's run it through in Montana. And that is, I say there is power in simplicity. There's power in the simplicity of our Constitution. There's power in the simplicity of your beautiful 1972 Montana Constitution. It's only about 30 pages. So I was at a joint board district irrigators office visiting with staff there, and she said, have you ever seen the whole compact? I said, well, no, I've just seen bits and pieces. She said, well, here it is, like that. I said, you're kidding. She said, yeah, it's over 1,000 pages. Well, I'm thinking back in Wisconsin, I remember something else that was about this big, called Obamacare, And there is loss of power in complexity. Absolute loss of power, and there is collusion and subterfuge and ambiguity, all intended where you hear somebody as genius as Congressman Nancy Pelosi saying, well, we have to pass this bill to see what's in it. You know what I mean? That's happening here. You have Montana governor, attorney general, legislators saying, well, we have to pass this bill to see what's in it, this proposed compact. Same game, in my view. Coming in as an outsider, it's the same game. And that is just as insulting as I know for the citizens of Montana. And that is something I think is not too late for all of you to scream as loud as you can to everybody you can, because I'm going to identify some other flaws. And I really encourage you to write letters to the editor, meet with your elected officials at every level, city, county, state, and give them these flaws and tell them this can't pass. I told you about the violation of the 3 constitutions. A really huge one is the absence of a waiver of tribal sovereign immunity. And that means the tribal government and 2 other signatures, there must be language in that proposed compact that says we will waive our sovereign immunity for purposes of all the contents of this compact, within the 4 corners of this compact. Full waiver of tribal sovereign immunity of the Salish Kootenai tribe that must be signed off not only by their leaders, but by the Secretary of Interior and the Department of Justice, title holders of the trust land. That isn't in there. And I have made that comment at, I don't know how many meetings down last week, and there were supporters of the compact in those meetings. There have been supporters of the compact in many meetings. And I believe if I said there's no waiver of sovereign immunity, I think somebody would be more than eager to jump up and say, "You're wrong, Mrs. Woman, there is too." There isn't. What the reality of that is, that compact, 1,000 pages or more, with all the subterfuge and collusion and all the stuff, that's removing water rights, that's removing your government, your state jurisdictions and protections, that compact, if there isn't a waiver of sovereign immunity, is something as useful as Charmin toilet paper. And the reason for that is because tribes are given tribal sovereign immunity. They cannot be sued. They cannot be sued. If a vendor is going to sell his supplies to a tribal business, he consents. That's the only distinction, is that he consents to do business with the tribe, and then he's subject to the tribal court and their government. Any suppliers and vendors, anybody who does business and consents to be governed by the tribe, that's the only exception. But if that waiver of sovereign immunity isn't in that document, you have a state that has consented to all of this, is putting the state under the jurisdiction of the tribe, and the counties, and the towns and cities, and each citizen under the jurisdiction, and not one of you, when they decide to follow or not follow, or do whatever they want, or jack your rates up, or do this or do that, no one at any level can sue it. So that the compact is useless. It's really useless, absent, not only useless, downright dangerous, absent that waiver of sovereign immunity. So that's it. Violates state constitutions, no waiver of tribal sovereign immunity. And you have legal counsels that have been working on this for years and spending how many dollars? Mm-hmm. And they're not paying attention to that, you know? And then perpetuity. It's a forever compact. Well, fundamental law school, that's not legal. And we had that approved recently in Wisconsin. Governor Jim Doyle, former Governor Jim Doyle, executed tribal Class 3 gaming compacts with the gaming tribes there. And he executed them, just taking little funds from them, and he executed them in perpetuity. Well, the state of Wisconsin's legislature sued former Governor Doyle, said you can't do that. You cannot handcuff future elected officials. A compact is a contract, has to have an effective date and an end date. And the state legislature won. Governor Doyle had to go in and change all those compacts with an end date, so that future elected officials could make decisions for their people. So this perpetuity baloney is illegal. It's already been shown and proven illegal in my state, Wisconsin, and I imagine others. That's a flaw. Monday, September 8th in the afternoon, I was at that WIPP committee meeting in Helena, and I gave a little testimony, and I also submitted some written testimony, and I called in the written testimony, I said that the decision of your state legislatures is you may have one or the other, but not both. You may have your state constitution, or you may have this compact, because they're on a collision course. They are not compatible. The compact can't be fixed. So if they bring in that compact, you have lost your Montana Constitution in 11 counties. Is that clear? So, and I put that in my written comments, and I said that this really smacks of, also in my written comments, legislative anarchy from the top down. So I was sitting in the WIPP committee meeting, and someone raised a question about, shouldn't we be identifying a court that all the parties agree to go to if they have a disagreement? And one of those women legal lawyers in the room said, oh, the courts, we don't have to worry about that. The courts know what they have jurisdiction over. And I thought, whoa, somebody needs to get back to law school. Because, you know, if there is not an identified state, and it really should be federal, but if there's not an identified court expressly described in that compact, agreed to by all the parties, then if there's any disagreement, especially with when you can't sue, you start in tribal court. Now, tribal courts, I'm going to kindly say, are a little less sophisticated, and that will tie this state or county government, city government, citizens up for years, because when you're in tribal court, you must exhaust tribal remedies. Mm-hmm. And do you think they're going to be in a hurry? You know? So there has to be, that's another flaw, there has to be an identified, I think, federal court that all the parties to the contract will move into if there's a dispute. That's not in there either. So it's no waiver, violates 3 constitutions, no court, perpetuity. And then there's this other one, and that is, and this kind of helps explain why the feds are in such a hurry. In June of 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court, who has been the only court in the country hearing citizens and hearing and watching what's happening to states and bringing us wonderful rulings. We've had at least a dozen in the last 5 or 6 years come down from the Supreme Court. I'm about to tell you about one of them. The problem is these rulings come down, but the Supreme Court has no enforcement and enforceability. So somebody has to pick up that rule and use it. The rule that the Supreme Court issued in a case called Tarrant versus Herman, June of last year, 2013, ruled this, 9-0, written by a very liberal justice, 9-0, unanimous. The quote is, states have the absolute right to their waters and the soils beneath them for all lands ceded to them upon statehood. States, just clear as a bell, states have absolute right to all waters and the navigable waters and the soils beneath them for all lands ceded to the state. That was Tarrant versus Herman. Almost immediately, EPA comes out with a new proposed rule for redefining navigable waters of the United States. I'm thinking, what navigable waters? The states have them, you know what I mean? They came out with that. Well, they got hit so hard and fast, and it's published in the Federal Register, and you have 30 days to comment. I have never seen EPA withdraw a proposed rule, but they did in 2 weeks. I've never heard of that. However, they have now resubmitted it, they've tweaked it a little, and they're out trying it again, because that ruling was based, let me back up and tell you what it was about. There were 4 states, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. Those 4 states entered into an interstate compact and agreed to share water as necessary and fairly with each other. If it's an interstate compact like that, it has to be approved by Congress and it becomes a federal compact. So when the Supreme Court rules, what happened was Arkansas wanted some water from Oklahoma when Oklahoma said, I don't think so, we can't do it right now. And that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. That case ruled in favor of the state of Oklahoma and for all states and trumped a federal compact, which was huge, really huge. It trumped a federal compact approved by Congress. States have that authority. That's water. Montana isn't even thinking about that case. I don't even know if they know about that case. I mentioned it in the Whippick testimony. And some lady representing those who proposed the tribe stood up and said, I don't think that case is pertinent to our state. And I thought, well, bless your heart. That case is also missing in action in your proposed compact. So there it is, your 3 constitutions are violated, no waiver of sovereign immunity, no identified court, perpetuity, and a powerful Supreme Court ruling that somebody needs to, mention to your state legislatures, and certainly your Attorney General. So those are the flaws, really flaws. And the reason I'm kind of chanting those is that I need each of you to write them down. I've emailed it out to some because you need to talk to folks because of what it does to you if this passes. If this, I've always seen this as an outsider as so much more than water. Yes, it's about water and it's about losing rights attached to land and it's about, really nailing the the irrigators, and it's about suddenly giving a tribal government control over in-stream of off their reservation. That's not in the other compacts with the tribes. In-stream flows and outstream flows and off-reservation waters, it's insane. It's insane, and all you're hearing around here is what a good deal. We got to pass this to see what's in it. You folks know better. You folks know better. So do they. But there's mystery in there. There's subterfuge in there. There's misleading. It really troubles me, and I don't mind being very, very noisy about it. One of the things to do is to communicate those conversations with elected officials. Another big piece is to grow your voice. Talk to your family, your friends, your neighbors, your co-workers. Everything that we're talking about here help spread this information virus. We need an information epidemic virus because, quite frankly, when I speak in some other areas, I usually get questioned and answered, and I get people that disagree with me, and I get there is such, I think, an intentional absence of information here that has kept everybody like that mushroom, that some folks don't even know what questions to ask. And that's one of the reasons that book, the Going to Pieces book, it is sort of a primer. It is sort of those folks across the reservations that know what's going on, they really educated me as I was going along. And that book is very helpful to understand what tribal sovereignty is and is not, what your rights are and are not, what their rights are and are not. There's that lovely bright line. Tribal governments have no authority over you or me unless you or me consents. And in this case, you have the whole state of Montana. Oh, let me tell you this fun thing. I just thought of this the other day, and I'm talking it up. I'm not an attorney, absolutely not an attorney, but I did go to law school for 2 years in Ventura College of Law, and I studied family law and criminal law and constitutional law and contracts, and that was quite a long time ago, but you remember some things. And I was sitting out with my morning coffee once, and I thought, hey, wait a minute. Compacts are contracts. Generally, private sector, they're called contracts. Governments, like Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas, they're compacts. But they're really one and the same. It's just different terminology. Contracts are compacts, compacts are contracts. There are 3 legal elements that must be in a contract: the offer, the acceptance, and the consideration. So I'm sitting out with my morning coffee thinking about offer, acceptance, consideration. Then I'm looking at this proposed contract. I'm thinking, okay, the offer is, the Salish Kootenai tribe is offering to take all of the waters of 11 counties. That's the offer. The state of Montana is saying, hey, heck of a deal. That's the acceptance. That's the consent. That's the consent that can't be sued. So you have the offer. Salish Kootenai says, hey, we'll take all your water. The state of Montana says, fine, good. The consideration is the state saying, hey, we'll pay you $55 million more to take our water. Yep. They've got it backwards. Or you can reverse it. Let's say the state says, we'd like to give you our water. That's the offer, you know? And then the tribe says, okay, we'll take your water. We accept. And the consideration is still, the state says, here's $55 million to take our water. Either way you work the offer and acceptance, the state is paying a small domestic government that has no duty to you to take all that water and give them $55 million bucks. That, the framework, the structure of that compact that's in this stack, the legal framework is just abysmal, which makes me wonder, what are you guys using for legal counsel around here? You know what I mean? And that's really, now there are some compacts among governments where there's really very little consideration. There are governments that agree to not fight each other anymore, and they're just an agreement without consideration. But in this particular proposed compact, there's consideration. There's big money involved. There is the offer, there is the acceptance, there is big money rolling the wrong way, going with the water you're losing. So that, I think, is something to talk about too, because you folks that buy and sell cattle, buy and sell land, buy and sell homes, you know, offer, acceptance, consideration. Consideration is generally the money.
In the compact, the tribe does give up its immunity so it can be sued.
Then you need clarification on that, because no one has contradicted me on that, and I have not heard that that is in there at all. Well, let me put it this way. I would be very, very happy to hear that I am dead wrong about a waiver of sovereign immunity. I'd be very happy. I would even write a letter to the governor of the state and say, I apologize for saying it wasn't in there. That is so critical to your compact, that if you're being told it's in there and it is not, everyone is toast. Same thing with this time immemorial. If there is such a thing as time immemorial, your U.S. Constitution is rendered irrelevant.
Well, to make it even a little bit more concrete, it's agreed in the compact that if anybody challenges it, all signers of the compact will protect the compact as written. So you've got the state of Montana and the federal government and the Indian tribes all,
Well, and those are the only three parties. The federal government.
They will all,
Yeah.
they all agree to protect the compact
Yeah.
from challenges in the future.
Wow, that's the federal government and the state and the tribal government. That's just openers. That's 2 against 1. There's another pattern that you need to be aware of, and we really experienced this the hard way in Washington State, and it is apparently the circumstance here, or at least I'm hearing that it is, and that is in Washington State. When I was there were 29 tribes. Now there's 31. When communities or citizens had a legal issue and were looking for legal counsel in Washington State, you couldn't find one. Those 29 or 31 tribes had placed cases with all the big law firms, and so they would say, I'm sorry, we have a conflict of interest. Could not find legal counsel in Washington State, or they would say, or the money is so big on, the tribal government budgets are huge, and the money is so much bigger on that side of the issue for attorneys, they'll go there. And it's very hard to find. I can count on 10 fingers the really good legal counsel across this country that will take on a case on behalf of a citizen or a city or town or county or even state. The money is so big on the other side of the aisle, and so that is one of our big difficulties.
I would like to go a little far afield here, but I have thought since this started that actually it was not the tribes and the tribal ideas or programs, that this has come down from the federal government in some way, and I would like to ask if people think it goes back to Agenda 21.
Absolutely.
I believe it does. It certainly ties in with the United Nations I mentioned earlier, and thank you for bringing that up, because we're in a serious place right now, 2014. We're in, as you know, with this true clash of East-West civilization. We have an executive branch in our government that is dismantling and practicing divisiveness among all of us. And there is this serious movement of environmentalists and some of the other folks that want the wilderness project. They want to depopulate areas, and this country is under assault from a range of perspectives. And one of them is the United Nations and the Aboriginal movement. I think another one is the East-West conflict. Here's a couple other things that just came to mind. One is, we all know we can all visualize the map of the United States, and most of us can identify all of the 48 lower states. The state of Washington and the state of Wisconsin are about the same land space base and an equivalent population. They're both about 6 million. And the political influence of the tribes in Washington State, 31 tribes in that same land base equivalent to Wisconsin, is severe. Wisconsin has 11 tribes, and when I moved there 7 years ago, I thought, oh boy, we're in for it again. But I feel, in a sense, and there is, much less political influence of the tribal government on the state legislature in Wisconsin, probably only because it's only got 11 tribes. So here's my point. Your state boundary has never changed since statehood, and it's not going to. Your state boundary is finite, and the natural resources within the state boundaries are, some finite as well. When you plunk down 31 small domestic governments and add to them a gaming monopoly that is tax exempt and give them all the federal subsidies you want, those funds are used to buy additional land and take it off the state tax base and jurisdiction, and you have 31 small domestic governments growing their land base in Washington State. And Washington State cannot grow its land base. So This is the real severity of the political takeover, the environmental takeover, the actual land-based takeover, all coming from this escalation of federal Indian policy that was set on fire with the Gaming Act, where the really big money came rolling in. I really encourage men and women who are retired, who can, to please get engaged, because I'm reminded of this principle that I live that really helps me, because I can't bear to feel like a victim. And what's happening to all of our citizens across this country is we're beginning to feel like a victim. And we're a victim of our own government. And that's exactly how the colonists felt. They were victims of their own government. And not every single colonist jumped up and did something about it, but enough did. So that enough did for us is every person who is capable of a little time, who's retired, or who can devote a Saturday, or who can take an hour to write a letter, or sit down and have a cup of coffee with somebody that doesn't get it. We have to do something. So the thing I live by is whenever there's a problem, the problem is me. I think the decisions that have been made domestically have destroyed our healthcare system, our banking system, our housing system, escalating federal authority out and utilizing the reservations and ponds to get the tribes as ponds to get some more. This federal government is really bullying its states. And too many states are not exercising their 10th Amendment authority, and it's the states who take care of our constitutional rights as citizens. A good bit that I mentioned that there's voting problems across the country, but they're a serious problem. It may be getting some attention, I don't know. We visited with the county clerk today, and because I kind of disturbed her when I mentioned polling precincts on Indian reservations that are sitting on trust parcels. The Secretary of State has no authority over them. Years ago, especially in the 2006 election when Senator John Tester defeated former Conrad Burns, Senator Burns, there were numerous polling precincts on Indian reservations, and the Secretary of State had no authority over them. There were ballot boxes unlocked all day. There were non-tribal poll watchers kicked out. There were ballot boxes taken in late at night, and it totally turned over the government of Bighorn County. This was critical on the Crow Reservation, but it happened on others too. And I just took a 44-page report to an official here that will be shared up the food chain on that. But I'm hearing that there's been efforts to fix that. I don't know that it has been. But on the Crow Reservation, the result of that 2006 election, ballot box, as I said, no compliance with state law for state elections. The ballot boxes were unlocked all day, picked up late at night by the Crow sheriff. He happens to be an enrolled Crow tribal member. And the ballot boxes taken into the county recorder at Bighorn County. She happens to be an enrolled Crow tribal member. And the result of that election, having issued new tribal membership cards in Indian names and English names and saying go vote here, go vote in Hardin, giving them big feasts. The result of that election is that all of the elected officials of Bighorn County are enrolled Crow tribal members.
Wow.
Your county commissioners, your clerk, your judge, your sheriff, they're all enrolled Crow tribal members, and at this point in time, since that election, I'm hearing that about 90% of your county employees are enrolled Crow tribal members. Now think about it. These are county officials making decisions for their county, and their decisions do not apply to them. They're making decisions for the non-tribal residents in Bighorn County. It is no fun to live there. And that is something that is a real concern. But here's how it affected the state. Your senator, then Senator John, well now Senator John Tester, was visiting all of the tribes religiously and was well funded in his campaigns, and was out there just the day before around the reservations. And those ballot boxes probably helped Senator Tester defeat former Senator Conrad Burns by a slim margin, and a sufficient one. So Montana got a Senator John Tester. The Senate got the 51st Democrat. Senator Tester shifted the power of the Senate. That's how significant those ballot boxes on Montana Indian reservations was to the whole country, to the really. And then there were the folks such as former Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell and other folks around the Indian industry and congressmen. They're saying, we own Tester. You know, we own him. Well, they do. They do. We've held our national conferences in D.C. and we've made appointments with Senator Tester, and sometimes him and sometimes his staff. But you may not speak of federal Indian policy in his office. You better not go there. And you're asked to leave. You know, and he's your senator. Yeah. The gaming money was huge at a time when that was the only big money going into elections. The McCain-Feingold bill had been passed, clamping down on big corporate contributions and clamping down on everybody, but it didn't include Indian tribes. They were accepted. And conveniently, the Federal Election Commission, when McCain-Feingold bill was the law, the Federal Election Commission, this is a 3-person appointed commission, not elected, and they issue advisory opinions about elections. And they issued one in May of 2005, just before the Bush-Gore presidential election, in time to pump the money. That Federal Election Commission advisory opinion said that tribal governments are governments for purposes of receiving subsidies and governing their members and properties, but they are not governments for purposes of participating in our elections. Now, Flathead County and the city of Kalispell, state of Montana, cannot cut checks to political parties or candidates. Governments may not contribute funds. They cannot participate in the elections. They cannot contribute to political parties or candidates. Tribal governments can and do with a big bunch of money. And it goes, so that gaming money that's buying land, it's buying legal counsel, it's buying lobbyists, and it's buying politicians. In the book I call them coin-operated politicians. They really are. And it's really way disproportional to the population. 1 out of 4 American Indians in our country is not even an enrolled tribal member. They're not even a part of these 566 tribes. They don't want to be. But one out of 4 are enrolled tribal members. That's like 1/2 of 1% of our 316 million Americans. 1/2 of 1% of our population has the political force and effect and influence that is just beyond the pale. It's the money. It's follow the money. The thing that gave me some relief, and it was a mixed blessing, and most folks don't call it a blessing, was when the Supreme Court overturned McCain-Feingold, called it unconstitutional in the Citizens United case. I'm not quite certain of the year, but I think it was a couple of years ago. In any event, that opened the election process to really big corporate money and way too much, and I totally opposed that. But I was relieved to hear that McCain-Feingold was overturned, because the only big money in that interim period between the FEC Commission, the effective date of McCain-Feingold, and the overturning by the Supreme Court, the only really big money going into both parties and buying governor's offices, legislators, was the big Indian gaming money. And the unions, and the unions.
And
yeah.
the entertainment industry.
Yeah, yeah.
Of the Supreme Court case?
Oh, the water case.
Yeah.
It was Tarrant, T-A-R-R-A-N-T, Tarrant versus Herman, H-E-R-R-M-A-N-N. There's some double concept. Tarrant versus Herman, June of 2013, 9-0. States own their waters and the lands underneath them. Now, your Montana Constitution in Article 9 provides a great process and system for Montana to manage its waters statewide. It also authorizes the state to negotiate the need for federal waters for Indian reservations and for federal waters for public lands. But at no point in time does Montana lose control of its waters in your present Constitution. Here's the other hilarious thing that happened. and this is the insanity of federal Indian policy. We are told that we stole their land. There is an absolute distrust of the white man. And by golly, we can't be sorry enough, long enough, or paid long enough. So we're told that we stole their land. So my husband is a Shoshone. He's an absolute direct descendant of Sacagawea's adopted son, Bazil. When she was returning on the Lewis and Clark, her sister had died, and Sacagawea adopted a little 4-year-old boy named Bazil. That is my husband's great-great-grandfather. His mother was at her grandfather's funeral. So my husband, and he's a quiet fellow, and he allows me to, and he fully supports me, but sometimes I can't bring him places because he gets too upset. Like he about had a heart attack when the North Dakota statue of Sacagawea, you know what I mean? So, but we were kind of new to Green Bay, and we attended a Meet the Oneida Nation event. So we're at their casino and their hotel, and a bunch of us from the village of Hobart, that is my employer, we're all there doing this meet and greet and listening to these presentations. And then they took Q&A, where you could ask a question and get a non-answer, and you could ask another question and get a non-answer. And my husband, who never speaks up, stood up and he says, there's something that's always been puzzling me. And mind you, the room is full. And I'm thinking, what the heck is he doing? You know, and he says, I understand the white man stole your land, and I understand you don't trust the white man. He says, what I don't understand is why you folks go out and pay top market dollar for land, and then you give it back to the white man free. You know, the trust, the federal trust, they do that. They buy the land and transfer title to the United States, transferring title right back to the white man. Well, when he asked the question, the room just like, it was really funny. But think about that. Think about that, and think about our tribal members' pawns too, because that's happening. They want to take their land back. They want to grow their land back, and then they give it back to the white man, who may or may not have any obligation to return that title. You know, it's quite a mess. And no one's winning. And then there's a deeply psychological troubling thing, and that is a tribal member who is an enrolled member, you know, he's a full U.S. citizen. If you're being persecuted by your tribal government, or if you're being maligned or you're in trouble, you can always disenroll. You can always move, you can disenroll. But the folks that live on the reservations know very little that's different, and there is this deeply held multi-generation belief that if I'm not enrolled, I'm not an Indian. Now that doesn't apply to 80% of American Indians. And the Congress also gave the tribal governments, the Indian Child Welfare Act, gave them the parental rights of enrolled tribal members under 18. Back here, and then we probably better wrap up.
The lady over here. I was just wondering, Elaine, do you have a website that has all of your information?
We do, and it's boring, but it's big. It's citizensalliance.org. It's like a law library on Indian policy. We have humongous amount of documents on that website. But we really need to upgrade it, and we're going to be looking to do that soon. And we don't have any like YouTube videos. One of our priorities is to upgrade that and make it more simple and usable. So, but we do, citizensalliance.org, and it has a search word that you can put in when you're looking for information. It has a search tool on it.
Okay, so some of the documents that you were referencing tonight, would you be able to find those on your website?
Oh yes, the Indian Gaming Regulation, yeah. And also you can Google things if you want to know, oh, here's something else. Indian policy is not that complex. Title 25 of the United States Code is federal Indian policy. It is the Indian Reorganization Act, just Title 25. There are some law enforcement pieces of Indian policy in Title 18. That's about it. They're Indian case law, and we have lists of case, and we keep them updated. Is a pretty consistent line of case law among all the courts. So once you start studying this, one of the reasons I can cite cases and dates and whatnot is because it's a body of law that is not as complex as, say, tax law or some of the contract law. It's a body of law that is understandable once you get started, once you know where to start looking. And it's very cohesive where the corruption is and isn't. Yes?
I was wondering if maybe you could even spend a little bit more time in this effort and take the crux, let's say that the central theme of this meeting tonight was the water compact, and you listed 5 or 6 very important things. If you could put those out to us either on your website or in an email to any one of us that you know here in the room.
I've done that, George.
As guidelines.
I've done that, George. I just sent it out to a few folks in the Missoula area and copied in Clarice, and I've identified actually 5 or 6 pieces, but I did a little short email to just so that I've got them, and I asked them to share those widely. So Clarice or I will share them with you. I don't have my laptop working.
Sure, that's fine.
But that's a good point. George just reminded me of another thing that's really important, because we have to get into solution mode and out of the victim mode. What can we do? And I do think this can be beat. I mean, it might be a little rose-colored glasses on my part, but I do think it is so flawed that it can be beat. One of the things to do, one of the things I'm recommending is that among these 11 counties, there are irrigator organizations, there are business organizations, there are off-reservation people, there are on-reservation people, and everybody sees a piece of this hippopotamus. It is absolutely urgent that all 11 counties, citizens in these counties that are capable, some of your businesses cannot participate. You need a statewide, a Western Montana statewide coalition. Get up on the higher ground. Yes, this is about water, but it's about your constitutional right and losing your rights as a citizen of this state. So we need to get a big statewide coalition with a blog, where kind of like a clearinghouse, where you can go to this website and get this information, and somebody sounds that, you know, like the Paul Revere website. They're doing this next. Go here, scream there, do this. That doesn't cost any money. That just means a central clearinghouse of that stays up with the news. You know, that is very, very critical.